In a recent interview with Game Informer, the series producer for the Legend of Zelda series made remarks suggesting that gameplay moving forward would be more like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom and less like Ocarina of Time. And for some longtime Zelda fans, this might be concerning. So it begs the question, does Tears of the Kingdom feel Zelda enough, and is this a good direction for the series to move forward in? That's what we'll be talking about today.
Listen!
Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and this time we are talking about if Tears of the Kingdom feels Zelda enough. Now let me point out there won't be any major spoilers in this video. I will be talking about some of my experience of Tears of the Kingdom so far. I'm about 30-ish hours in, but I won't be providing any specific details, so if you're also not entirely done with the game or we haven't played the game yet, this video will not spoil you. But before we move further, let me point out that we are now aiming to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. It may be a bit of a tall task, but if you enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell, and we'll see what the future holds. So to start things off, I'm going to be reading a few bits from this interview between the Zelda team and Game Informer, and then I'll be getting into my experience of the game and on whether I feel that Tears of the Kingdom is Zelda enough. The interviewer says, I think a lot of people share the viewpoint that Ocarina of Time was kind of the starting point for one era of Zelda games, laying the foundation for the several titles that came after it. Do you see Breath of the Wild as establishing the new blueprint or foundation of the next several Zelda games for years to come? Eiji Aonuma responds, with Ocarina of Time, I think it's correct to say that it did kind of create a format for a number of titles in the franchise that came after it, but in some ways, that was a little bit restricting for us. While we always aimed to give the player freedoms of certain kinds, there were certain things that format didn't really afford in giving people freedom. Of course, the series continued to evolve after Ocarina of Time, but I think it's also fair to say that now we've arrived at Breath of the Wild and a new type of more open play and freedom that it affords. Yeah, I think it's correct to say that it has to create a new kind of format for the series to proceed from. So with these words here, it is noting that the previous style Zelda games were too restrictive, so they do plan on moving forward with the more open style of gameplay from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. It gives them more options. But my interpretation of this isn't just necessarily that it's going to be exactly like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. I think what's meant to be said here is that with both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they're more willing to break down some of the foundations for Zelda and reconsider how they should make a Zelda game. But while still maintaining a bit of that Zelda essence, they can create new things that will feel refreshing. So, while I do think that some of this does mean that that open air style of gameplay will continue, some elements of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom may be changed and they're not going to hold themselves to exactly that formula, but yes, open air is here to stay. But here's another part of the interview that I think will be valuable for this discussion. The interviewer says, Breath of the Wild was such a change from the rest of the franchise, but it still had a lot of the same DNA and undeniably felt like a Zelda game. When you're implementing new features and innovating in such drastic ways with a long-running and beloved series like The Legend of Zelda, is there any nervousness that they might alienate longtime fans? Aonuma responds, well, it's just as you said, making sure that Zelda-ness or that Zelda feel is really in the game. I think that's a really important point. Even if a game like Breath of the Wild has really big changes in it, as long as the fans and the players are able to feel that this is a Zelda game at its core when they play the game, that is something that is really important for us when meeting fans' expectations. So with what's said here, I feel that at least some fans will feel more comfortable or can rest assured that the Zelda team does care about fan expectations and wants to keep the essence of Zelda. He said it right there. But he also said Breath of the Wild has that Zelda essence, and by extension I'm assuming they also mean Tears of the Kingdom. So what exactly is that Zelda essence? That isn't necessarily clearly defined here. Well, in prior interviews it's been discussed that when making Breath of the Wild they were thinking about breaking down the foundations for the Zelda series, and they went back to looking at the original Legend of Zelda. And the original Legend of Zelda was an open adventure. You can choose to journey throughout the world of Hyrule in your own way. There were puzzles and challenges and dungeons all throughout the world, and it was about crafting your own adventure. And I do agree that those are key points to the Zelda series, but as the generations have progressed, the Zelda series has evolved game by game and has established other foundations that many fans have come to love, so if they didn't go back to some of these, I think fans would be disappointed. But playing through Tears of the Kingdom, and having played Breath of the Wild hundreds of hours, I do feel that there are many aspects to Tears of the Kingdom that are very Zelda-like. It does feel like a Zelda game. It doesn't feel like a Zelda clone. It doesn't feel like just this random open sandbox game with many abilities and puzzles that has Zelda on the box. It feels like a Zelda game to me. And I'll also say Breath of the Wild felt like a Zelda game to me, but it didn't feel like a Zelda game to everyone. And I do understand that, and I'll say that the wait between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I myself was hoping and talking about in a lot of my videos that I would like to see some tropes from prior Zelda games return in Tears of the Kingdom. And I really do feel like Tears of the Kingdom is going in the right direction. They are moving in the open air direction, but also they are retaining a lot of things that feel very Zelda-like. I think it's fair to say that Tears of the Kingdom is more Zelda-like than Breath of the Wild, if that makes any sense. And what I mean by that is that while the core foundations from the original Legend of Zelda are in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, a lot of those other elements that are built up throughout the other Zelda games have been brought into Tears of the Kingdom as well, or have become more prominent in Tears of the Kingdom because some of them were still in Breath of the Wild. So for example, dungeons. Now, there's been some debate about dungeons. They aren't exactly like prior Zelda games, and I'm not going to tell you exactly how they are, but I've been through one already, and I'll tell you, I was very much content with the dungeon. There was a lead up to the dungeon which reminded me very much of like Skyward Sword. It was kind of linear if you chose to maintain this part of the adventure, and it was challenging but in the best way possible. But there is a certain point where you get to the actual dungeon, and from what I've heard and from what the Zelda team has said officially in interviews, each dungeon has their own unique theme, and this dungeon seemed like a fairly unique theme to me. It was pretty darn cool, and there was music that developed throughout the dungeon as well. It was a fairly large dungeon to me. It took me maybe about an hour, so maybe it might be considered something shorter than prior dungeons, and the structure of it did remind me somewhat of the Divine Beasts in Breath of the Wild, but it felt different in the right ways to me. The music, the theming, the overall puzzle dynamic didn't feel like something that would be copied for every single dungeon. It feels like every dungeon is going to have its own thing. It's not like Breath of the Wild, where you have this map that you can interact with all 4 Divine Beasts, and once you figure out that the moving of this map changes around the actual dungeon, all 4 dungeons become really easy and quick to finish. That doesn't look to be the case with this one dungeon I've done. And then it did culminate into a pretty amazing boss fight. The kind of boss fight that we've come to love from prior Zelda games. So if you are a Twilight Princess fan, a Wind Waker fan, an Ocarina of Time fan, some of the bosses that we experienced in the past, the boss here that I experienced was very much like that, and it gives me confidence that the other dungeons will feel similar as well. So you have a unique setting for the dungeon, a nice unique theme, a unique set of puzzles for it, a really epic boss fight, unique music, things that the Divine Beast didn't really have, the dungeons seem to have in Tears of the Kingdom, and that really is a big step in the right direction, I would say. But going beyond that, I would say that the music overall in Tears of the Kingdom is more varied and noticeable than Breath of the Wild. And I'm not trying to say Breath of the Wild had bad music. Breath of the Wild has great music, but a lot of it was very atmospheric. A lot of it was very subtle. And there's still a lot of that subtlety, a lot of that atmospheric, ambient sounds and music throughout the experience that adapts and changes as you explore the world. But there's more variety, and there are more moments that stick out to me. And there's a lot of moments of remixed older Zelda tunes that are in here as well. So I'm reminded of prior games. There's a lot of that nostalgia, but some of those really great scores and tracks we've come to enjoy from prior Zelda games, a bit of that is here too. It's kind of like a happy middle ground. And that's the overall sentiment I've had throughout most of my experience with Tears of the Kingdom. The dungeons are a happy middle ground, the music is a happy middle ground, but it goes a bit beyond that as well. Something that I've come to enjoy from the Zelda games is a lot of quirky characters that you can interact with. some that have really fun side quests. And when it comes to side quests, this has been a topic of debate throughout the different major Zelda games because some have had more of it than others. Majora's Mask, The Wind Waker, had better side quests than, let's say, maybe Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess. But there's some debate there. You may like some of the side quests in Wind Waker over Twilight Princess. Point is, there was always kind of an asking for more of these side quests, more of these unique characters. And the side quests in Breath of the Wild, they were okay. There were some fun ones, but for the most part, they were kind of basic fetch quests. In Tears of the Kingdom, there's a lot more characters that you interact with naturally throughout your experience. The world feels a lot denser with a lot more personalities, and a lot of them provide unique scenarios that are side quests that feel like its own thing. And each character is telling their story of their experience of the upheaval event, the major changing story event for Tears of the Kingdom. And I really feel like it adds to a living, breathing world, and these different quest scenarios offer up a lot more variety to the experience. So it feels like they've taken some of those cool, interesting scenarios we saw from prior Zelda games that were limited and really expanded upon it in a way where it's varied and in depth throughout the game world. So they've made it better. So Tears of the Kingdom retains that open air gameplay where you explore the world however you choose, in any direction you choose. With these abilities, they have so many different applications and really comes down to your creativity, and there's tons of challenges and puzzles to be had. But at the same time, they've made the musical score more prominent, the dungeons are more unique and varied, and there are these epic boss fights, some things that we kind of missed in Breath of the Wild that were from prior Zelda games, and those unique NPCs we've seen throughout the game worlds in prior Zelda games, they've brought them in, and they are more varied, there are more of them, and there's a lot of really cool fun scenarios that don't feel like just basic fetch quests. And from what I've experienced with the story so far, which is still fairly limited, I'll say that it's more involved, it's more active, it's got a lot more going on than Breath of the Wild, and I think that does bode well, and I think that's something that most Zelda fans would also appreciate too. So I think Tears of the Kingdom, if you were someone that didn't like Breath of the Wild as much because it lacked some of those prior Zelda elements, Tears of the Kingdom does a good job of kind of meeting everyone in the middle. And if this is the direction moving forward for the Zelda series, I personally have no issues with that. I think this is a great direction to move forward with in the series. But thanks to this recent interview, we at least know that the Zelda team has in mind prior Zelda fans and wants to make them happy as well. But what do you guys think? Do you believe that Tears of the Kingdom feels Zelda enough? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andre's Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.